Lyman, a dark-haired young man, is as social as a rock, scarcely coming into contact with his co-workers. He spends his nights driving up and down highways, wearing an orange uniform, and residing mainly in himself. Lyman is an educated person, but his knowledge of social justice is so scarce that this education doesn't do him any good. Fiona, another main character of the story that is about to be told, is the complete opposite of him. She works at a college library and likes speaking with other people more than anything. The story begins when, one ordinary morning, a mysterious parrot flies inside Lyman's RV. The green bird is so hilarious that Lyman closes the door and decides to become friends with it immediately. The new inhabitant of his house quickly gets accustomed to the area. As it turns out, however, screaming "shut up" and "I'm an eagle" isn't the only thing he can do. And so, once the bird makes a mess, Lyman goes to a vet shop, gets a cage, and fills out a form, saying that a lost bird found him. One more important thing is that he is given a free book as well. There, the two characters' paths cross one another. Once Lyman walks out of the store, Fiona comes inside. She seems to be the author of the book and a friend of the owner, so she shares one thing about Lyman. As it turns out, the young man goes to the same university where she works. She often catches him staring at her, but the man never talks. If you ask Fiona, Lyman is either shy or gay. The owner of the shop, however, believes that none of that is true. Fiona just needs to get his attention. That night, she tries to do just that, but her indirect, subtle attempt proves futile. On the highway, the man pays attention only to his job and has no interest in small talk. And so, since hints don't seem to be working, Fiona decides to move forward. It is almost comical to see Lyman's face the next morning at the university when Fiona comes up to him. The girl invites him on a poetry night at first, but when Lyman remains silent, she turns to describing how she looks underneath the skirt. Lyman's expressions are altered for a moment. Clearly, Fiona has finally provoked a conversation. But even in this conversation, Lyman remains reserved and cold. The girl doesn't back down, though, nor is she angry at his insensitivity. It is obvious to her that he has a story. That afternoon, after returning to his home, Lyman is furious at himself. Scolding his own inability to participate in a flirtatious conversation, he suddenly hears the parrot say other things too. This time, its speech is much more mischievous. It says, "Ma 17, and follows it up with the voice of a preacher saying that the bird of the air shall carry a word. Suddenly, Lyman realizes that this might not be an ordinary bird. It might be keeping a secret. In the next scene, Fiona catches a glimpse of Lyman and sneaks up on him from behind. She knows that he has a bird, so she asks a thing or two about it. At first, their conversation goes as before. Lyman tries to run away from having to share anything, while Fiona keeps trying to make it obvious that she likes him. In the middle of their conversation, the man finally breaks. Yielding back, he spills the information about the parrot. He tells her everything, including the part in which the parrot is beginning to appear mysterious. Fiona's initial reaction is a little skeptical. This is why Lyman reactively tries to go back into his shell. Running away, he exits the library and intends to say goodbye for good, but Fiona tries to correct her mistake. She says that she can come to work with him and meet the parrot afterwards. She's good with pets and can help. Naturally, Lyman isn't ready for that much intimacy yet, but thanks to Fiona's forward attitude, he is actually beginning to gradually become more social. It is clear that he likes her as well. That night, he even tries to have a conversation with a waitress named Margie. He's been eating in her restaurant for years, but has never had a single conversation with her. It is both comical and lovely to see him make this effort. Margie is delighted to hear him finally speak up too. They are talking about the parrot in the next scene, when Lyman is suddenly called to service. As it turns out, there is a crash on the highway, and his hand is needed. The man rushed there quickly. Grunting to give a man in need a hand, Lyman tries to find his way around the truck when Fiona calls him. Confused, he tries to take the phone, but comically, it slips out of his hand and lands on the man's crotch. Eventually, it is this man who takes the call and transfers Fiona's words to Lyman. As it turns out, the girl has learned that the thing the parrot has been preaching is taken directly from the Bible. The next evening, after discussing the Bible lines in a little more depth, Fiona learns something unusual about Lyman. As it turns out, Lyman only knows his own last name. As weird as it might sound, this detail adds mysteriousness to his character, and Fiona likes that a lot. That night, while at work, this mysterious man notices a red Mustang, revving the engine on the road as if the driver wanted to harm him. It is the second time Lyman has seen this muscle car. After returning home the next morning, he sees Fiona waiting for him by the RV. Naturally, Lyman doesn't appreciate this kind of privacy violation. After a quick back and forth in which the chemistry between them is clearly shown once more, Lyman's phone starts ringing. As it turns out, the owner of the bird is finally raging. She wants her parrot back. And so, the duo, together with the parrot and Fiona's dog named Floyd, head out into the desert in search of the owner's house. Meeting with the parrot's owner is a hilarious part of the story. She is a middle-aged woman with an annoyingly high-pitched voice and a very sly way of negotiating prices. As it turns out, she doesn't really like the parrot, and the only thing she learned while living around this house is to say, "Shut up." Realizing that this woman isn't the original owner, and further understanding that she doesn't really love him, Lyman offers to buy it. This is when the negotiations start. Fiona knows that these birds go for $800, but the woman is asking $2,000 for them. Lyman, who clearly has no understanding of how these kinds of negotiations work, takes a pen and gets ready to sign a check. But Fiona doesn't let him do that. She stands up abruptly, and she starts playing the role of his wife. She demands that he sign a check for no more than $800, or else she will divorce him. The way she talks is quite believable. So once Lyman follows her path, the woman surrenders. Clearly the duo make a good team. And so, Lyman is now the owner of this bird. Unusually enough, however, he has no intention of keeping it. What he wants to do is find the original owner and get to the bottom of the things that the bird is saying. In the next scene, the duo finally finds out the name of the parrot. It seems to be Shelton. As to the woman who had him before, the great negotiator, she seems to have passed 13 years ago. The next morning, Fiona pays him another visit. Walking around his RV, she glances at the things he has collected on the highway over the years and realizes that the young man is extremely flawed. She also notices the fact that there are no pictures at his place. Wondering where his parents or siblings are, she asks him about his family. But Lyman, who's playing around with Shelton's new cage, says nothing. This is when Fiona gets irritated at him for the first time. Wondering where all this secrecy is coming from, she demands an answer, and hears him say calmly that he doesn't have a family. As it turns out, he was found by the side of the road when he was only 4. Suddenly, Fiona has a very strong reaction to this. Imagining what being an orphan would feel like, tears come to her eyes, and soon she becomes immersed in sorrow. Sobbing her heart out, she puts her head on Lyman's chest for a second, and then feels an urge to leave. Saying that she has to go, she gets into her car, all teary-eyed and red-faced, and drives away. Later that day, while looking through the archives of the university, she finds out more about Lyman's past. As it turns out, his parents lost their lives in a car accident on a highway, but he survived. Perhaps this is exactly why he works at a highway to this day, helping stranded people in need of help. Speaking of the people in need of help, Lyman knows that Fiona's car is a trap. One of the tire rods in her car needs screwing, and one day it might just fall off. Knowing this, Lyman walks up to the vehicle in the next scene and, without her permission, gets beneath it to mend it. Unfortunately for him, this is especially true when the campus police come. Aggressively, the officer shackles him up and gives him harsh questions. Lyman shows quick wit here. He lies, saying that it's his girlfriend's car. This is especially true when Fiona comes out of the campus building. As expected, she finds this situation incredibly enjoyable. Overdoing the role of a girlfriend, she tells the officer to free Lyman and asks the young man to drive her home. Once the two get into the car, we see Lyman being vulnerable for the first time. He seems to be a little hurt after Fiona called him flawed this morning. Thankfully, the girl knows exactly how to make him feel better. She seems to have looked up what Ma-17 means and learned that it is a phone number from the 30s. They should check some old phone books to find new clues. And so, the next morning, Lyman comes by her house for the first time. Struggling to find his place among countless books, he hangs awkwardly as Fiona changes her clothes. On the way towards the library in the next scene, Lyman shares another mystery about the parrot. As it turns out, he doesn't answer to Shelton, so his true name might be something else. Now that Lyman has become more familiar with this girl, their communication has become much more colorful and interesting. The chemistry between them is that much more noticeable now. As comical as it is, the only thing standing between them is Floyd. For some reason, Lyman seems to fear him. Soon, as more is learned about Ma-17, Fiona notices how the young man starts eyeing a librarian. She gets infuriated immediately. She's been here right in front of him this whole time, and she didn't get that look even once. As the visit to this library is put to an end, she expresses her rage freely and openly. Lyman is just like everybody else. He's always looking away, searching for something, instead of noticing what's right in front of him. When this conflict passes and the night comes, Lyman notices the same Mustang again. This time, the car stops nearby, the driver comes out, and he starts beating the car up. Desperately, he is screaming at it, trying to damage it, when Lyman appears to help. Knowing that the man might be dangerous, he holds a gun. The desperate man notices this very quickly. Wanting to see his car destroyed, he gives him an unusual request. He wants him to shoot the car. Unexpectedly, after a few begging words, Lyman holds it out and fires. He enjoys shooting the Mustang a lot. Later that night, he comes across an extremely tragic scene on the highway. Seeing a family of 3 draw their last breath after an accident reminds him of his own trauma. The next morning, he is seeking solitude in the university library when Fiona comes up to him with new, important information. As it seems, she has just acquired the number of a man named Charles. This is the man who purchased the parrot for his mother before he put her in the nursing home. Suddenly, after giving Lyman this number, Fiona realizes that he's been trying to avoid her. Angry at him, she storms out of the library in rage. Lyman tries to run after her, but he fails to catch up in time. Later that day, he uses the number to track down this Charles person. As it turns out, Charles bought the bird from a man named Eli Stowalski. When Lyman calls Eli in the next scene, he says that he bought the bird from a paperback in June 1968. The only thing he told him to say was, "I am an eagle." Clearly, Lyman will have to keep on following the clues until he gets to the person who taught the bird the biblical words. Following this strand of knowledge, he finds the name of the person who sold it in the paper very soon. This is when he notices something unusual happening to the bird. For some reason, he is beginning to pluck his feathers and speak much less. Taking precaution, Lyman goes to the veterinarian and gets a suggestion to find him a mate. The bird seems to be feeling lonely. Lyman is clearly making some advancements with regards to the parrot. His relationship with Fiona, however, seems to be on pause. This is why, in the next scene, he visits her at home to apologize. Initially, the girl acts hostile. She even flirts with her neighbor in front of him. But Lyman is only briefly affected by this scene. As it seems, he has come with a present for Floyd. It is a reflective collar aimed at making his night walk safer. Fiona's hostility clearly fades out after this, but she still looks away from him. This is when Lyman takes his first step towards her. He asks her out on a date. It is true that their schedules aren't allowing that, but she can come to work with him tonight. Fiona's ice is finally broken. Delighted to see Lyman taking a step forward, she kisses him on the cheek firmly. When she enters her home again, the young man is petrified on the spot. That night, when dressed-up Fiona enters his truck, Lyman's quiet personality is nowhere to be found. Over-exaggerating the dangerousness of the road ahead, he manages to even flirt with the girl. Unexpectedly, he requests a kiss. Fiona leans over him, and just in the moment when the two start making out, the campus police appear in front of Lyman once more. Unfortunately, the lovemaking must wait. And so, for the first time, working is a drag for Lyman. As the two converse about the parrot's stereotypical speech, both wish that the road goes on forever. After helping a Spanish group with their car, Lyman points out one difference between people and internal combustion engines. Engines work and last, while human relationships always break. Fiona disagrees. In the argument that follows, she has to remember some of her unsuccessful relationships, but she still manages to make her point. Perhaps it is true that relationships don't last, but they are still worth it. After this conversation, Fiona says something to Lyman. She takes him to a motel his parents checked into before the accident, and reveals to him that she's been trying to learn about his past. As it turns out, she failed to find anything about Lyman's parents or their friends and relatives. Lyman is truly alone. Naturally, the young man isn't so happy that somebody meddled in his past, but he knows that Fiona appreciates him for who he is today. That night, while eating together, the couple speak passionately. Discussing the mystery of the parrot, Lyman argues that they should keep searching for clues. This mystery has become really important for him, and perhaps the reason for it is very simple. Without the parrot, the two would have never connected. This is the mystery that ties them together and provides their relationship with kindling. When the duo go fishing in the next scene, Fiona hits him with a delightful gesture. She disappears out of his sight unexpectedly and comes back to him with a muffin and a candle, singing a birthday song. Since Lyman's birthday is unknown even to himself, she uses her authority to just pick a date, and so she announces today to be his birthday. Lyman is speechless. This seemingly simple surprise makes him feel special, like a person worthy of love, just like anybody else, feeling an irresistible urge to embrace her. He puts an end to the talking part of their night's adventures. It is when the car fills up with the sounds of smooching lips and heavy breathing that suddenly the couple hear the whimpering of a dog. As it turns out, it was just hit by a truck on the road. Quickly, Lyman runs out to help it. But unfortunately, he is forced to come back for his gun. He will have to put him out of his misery. In tears, Fiona screams to take him to the vet to try and bring him back. But Lyman sees his dreadful condition. The shot is fired, and the grave is dug. The night ends on a very tragic note for both. No words are spoken until Lyman drives her home. Still in tears, Fiona gets out of the truck and goes to embrace her dog. After this gloomy morning, Lyman decides to take care of the parrot's loneliness problem. Carving out a wooden parrot for him, he gives him a new name. From now on, the parrot is called Zane. That afternoon, Lyman receives a call back from the family that sold the parrot on paper in the 60s. Mr. Weber, the owner of the bird, seems to be a wonderful person. Delighted to see the parrot later that evening, he started telling stories of the past. As it turns out, he got the parrot from his neighbor, Mrs. Hall. Unfortunately, the woman is long deceased now, and so, the question of who taught biblical lines to the bird is still unanswered. Time flies, but after the incident on the road, Fiona disappears from Lyman's life. As it seems, there is no more information the latter can lean on about Zane, and with Fiona being absent, the young man becomes lost in life. Out of nowhere, his regular job nights become bleak and meaningless, and his mornings are sleepless and uninteresting. The same cannot be said about the morning that follows. However, Fiona comes by to say goodbye. After giving Lyman yet another number of Zane's previous owners, she informs him that she is leaving. One thing is immediately noticeable in her behavior. She is no longer looking Lyman in the eyes. Perhaps, after observing the dark nature of his everyday life, she realizes that it is dangerous to associate your life with such a man. She isn't angry at Lyman for putting that dog out of his misery. She just doesn't want to know what he knows. Saying this, Fiona says goodbye and walks outside to get back inside her car. This is when Lyman decides to fight back, pointing out that she is just running away from the life she cannot handle. He emphasizes that her car is in terrible condition. If she gets on the highway with it, she will inevitably end up stranded in the middle of the road. This isn't enough for Fiona to turn around, however. She knows for a fact that there are kind people on the highway, and they are always ready to help. The next day, after a white night, Lyman takes Zane to yet another one of his earlier owners. The woman's name is Ivy Campbell, and she calls the parrot Mr. Roosevelt. She is a delightful, talkative person. From her story, Mr. Roosevelt was his father's bird, who bought the parrot from a band of gypsies that were passing through. It is clear to Lyman now. There is no other person he can talk to about the parrot. He has officially gone as far into the past as was possible. The only way to go now is forward. That night, the young man makes a fateful mistake. He forgets to fill up his propane tank, and as a result, the temperature in his RV drops. Zane is a tropical bird, and he is very old, so unfortunately, he fails to withstand the cold. When Lyman wakes up, he finds him lying on the floor of his cage like a rock. After rushing him to the vet, he receives advice to prepare to hear bad news when his phone rings. The person on the other side of the line knows that he's not working at the moment, but there's been a black pile of ice on the highway, and he might want to help. Unfortunately, Fiona is one of the drivers involved in the accident. Leaving Zane to the veterinarian, Lyman rushes to get there as fast as he can. Thankfully, both Floyd and Fiona are all right. Lyman is sliding on the black ice when he catches a glimpse of the girl. Their eyes meet and their faces brighten. But suddenly, they notice a black car coming in at high speed towards them. Very soon, it becomes clear that Floyd is inevitably going to end up under its tires. There is no other way. He must be helped. As Fiona screams at him to move aside, Lyman dashes towards the dog, takes it in his hands, and throws it at Fiona. Unfortunately, it is him who gets hit by the car. A time of tragedy and grief comes into Fiona's life. In the course of the next scene, we see her taking care of some legal things in hospitals and in Lyman's RV, and we think that the man has surely passed. In the next scene, however, we learn that everybody, even Zane, came out of this dreadful situation alive. Lyman wakes up in his bed and, swirling on his feet, suddenly realizes that something is wrong. His house is shaking as if it were in the middle of a tornado. Opening the door, he sees passing mountains and trees and closes it immediately. This is when he notices a piece of paper stuck to his chest. It is from Fiona, and what's written there changes his whole perspective on what is happening. As it turns out, his house is currently being towed by Fiona. She is driving to her childhood town, where her family is waiting for them. Lyman, who has been on the road for his entire life, will finally manage to go past it.